Alright guys, Matt here from BrushUp. Welcome back to another episode of BrushUp Basics, where in this one I'm going to be talking you through how to make my ultimate pencil brush. The brush has pen tilt functions for shading, as well as pen pressure functions to control the opacity of the brush, and was designed to look and function as realistically as possible in terms of getting as close to a real pencil as possible. So the brush looks a little bit like this. So the general principles of the brush are designed to be as close to an actual pencil as possible. So the lighter you press on with your Apple Pencil, the lighter the stroke will be. The heavier you press on with the pencil, the heavier the stroke will be. Which makes it really good for sort of all ranges of pencil work. So a lighter stroke is going to be really good for like your guidelines and your roughing in your shapes and your outlines. Whereas a heavier stroke is going to be good for neatening up. And it's almost like layering on top. So you start with the lighter ones, and then you layer on top with a heavier stroke, and just gradually neaten up your line work. The brush also has pen tilt functions as well. So as you tilt the pencil, the stroke will become a lot broader and a lot larger, but it also become a lot softer, meaning it's really good for adding any shading into your work as well. So that's just a general outline of how the brush functions and what it looks like. Let's get into how we make it. So we're going to want to start out with a shape that looks something like this. So you can see it's a lot thicker on the top, and it sort of fades out towards the bottom, including texture along the way. There are brushes or brush tips in the Pro library which are good at replicating this. I always find it's best to kind of try and create something like this. You can just draw this up in Procreate. It's just getting that texture in there that's important, and getting the general shape. And that the most important thing really is that gradual kind of fade out in terms of the texture. So once you've got something that looks a little bit like that, you want to create a new brush and import that shape that you've just made into the shape source section. All you do is click on the insert photo button and you can just find it in your photos. For the grain source on this one, you can just choose one from the Pro library. I find the best ones to go for are the ones with kind of a lot of contrast in them, so a lot of darks and a lot of lights. Basically, they give the best texture for a pencil brush because it's kind of like that gritty texture that you're looking for. So one I like to go for is this charcoal coarse or charcoal rough. Either one of them's as good as each other. I just prefer using the charcoal coarse just because it's a little bit less contrast. It's a little bit easier to control. So at this point, you're going to have something which looks a little bit like this. Nothing like a pencil, really. So you're going to go back into your brush menu, into the stroke panel, and then you're going to want to bring your spacing to around about 27%. And that's just going to, same as in the last episode, spread out the distance between the brush tips, just so it's a little bit less kind of perfectly smooth and it's got a little bit more texture to it. The streamline can stay at 0, but we want to put the jitter up to around 25%. Somewhere around there is fine. It doesn't have to be exact. And all that's going to do is kind of explode the brush tips. So it kind of separates them out in different directions from each other. And again, it's all about adding that texture in there as well. So at this point, we're going to want to kind of limit the size and the opacity of the brush stroke and kind of bottleneck what it can actually do in terms of size. So you want to head into the General tab, which is just there, take the size limits, take the max down to around 7%. I know it sounds low, but it'll make sense in a minute. You can leave the minimum on none. And the opacity settings, so the max needs to be on around 70%, and the minimum can be around, I'd go between 3.5 and 4 if you can get it to that. What that does is it just kind of, depending on where you put the size and the opacity slider, it will kind of limit it to what we've put. So the size limit, if you put it to the max, will be 7% of what it actually would be, if that makes sense. It just kind of limits the size of how big the brush can be and limits the opacity of what the brush can go to as well. So in the shape panel, we're going to want to put the scatter to around about 20%. And what that's going to do is randomize a little bit the rotation of the shape source. And similarly, we're going to want to put the azimuth tab on, which basically gives you a little bit more control over the rotation of the shape source based on which way your pencil is actually facing. So your physical Apple Pencil. So at this point, you should have something which looks a little bit like this. So it's definitely getting there, but still not perfect, still not exactly what we want. So we're going to want to play with the texture of the brush now. So we're going to head into the grain panel, which is just there. we're going to put the movement of the grain to around about 30%, the scale of the grain to around 40%, and the zoom to around about 8.5. That's not too important, but I think around 8.5 is good. You're also going to want to put the rotation to follow stroke, which just means the general direction of the grain will follow the stroke and where your pencil's going as well. So now heading into the dynamics panel, on the opacity dynamics, you're going to want to put the jitter to around about 50%. What that does is randomizes the opacity of each shape source. So some of them will be really opaque, some of them will be really transparent, and that's just all about adding in that texture to the brush as well. Similar thing with the size dynamics, so the jitter on that will want to go to around 15% this time. And that does a similar thing to the opacity jitter, but it just does it with size. So some of them will be a little bit larger, some of them will be a little bit smaller. So at this point, we've got something which looks vaguely like a pencil, which is good. The next thing we're going to want to do is head into the pencil tab to change up how we actually control the brush. So the opacity, that's one of the most important things. You want to be able to control the opacity. That's the thing that's going to give you the kind of faint strokes compared to the thick strokes. So put that to the max, and that's going to give you the biggest dynamic range of opacity. Put the bleed to the max as well. The bleed is a little bit of a funny one. It's hard to explain. Basically, putting it to the max just increases the contrast of the texture. So it just makes it look a lot cleaner and a little bit less kind of soft and soppy. The size can actually stay where it is. We're not actually controlling the size of the brush stroke with the pencil pressure. As with a normal pencil, the only thing you're really changing is the opacity and kind of how faint the line is. So at this point, we've got something which basically resembles a pencil, which is good. The next thing we're going to want to put in is those shading functions that I talked about earlier. And the way that we do that is head back into the pencil panel, go to the Apple Pencil tilt functions, which are just at the bottom there, change the angle to around about 10%. Basically, the easiest way to explain this is you're putting that to the angle that your pencil has to be to implement those tilt effects. So if you put it to 10 degrees, your pencil will have to be at 10 degrees to implement those tilt effects. If you put it to 50 degrees, your pencil will have to be at 50 degrees to implement those tilt effects. It's basically, that's how it works. The opacity can stay at 0, the gradation can go to around 50%, and all that is it kind of adds a gradient, sort of like a faded gradient to your brush stroke as you put that pen tilt function in. The bleed can go to around about 20%, and the size can go to 35%-ish. And that size slider is just kind of, as soon as those pen tilt functions kick in, your brush stroke is now going to be 30-35% larger than it normally would be. That's just the best way to explain it. The size compression can also stay on. And that's essentially it. You've got your settings all set up so you can control the opacity of the line. Lighter strokes equal fainter lines, heavier stroke equals heavier lines, obviously. All your tilt settings are all set up as well, so you can add some nice shading in there. The pencil also works in colour, so if you want to add some coloured pencil effects, it's really good for that as well. So enjoy. If you can't bother to follow through this tutorial, the Ultimate Pencil is part of a pack of my brushes called the Sketch Toolkit, which includes the Ultimate Pencil, as well as a few other pencil brushes, sort of variations on the Ultimate Pencil, as well as blenders, which is designed to kind of be everything you need for just general sketching and outlining. So I'll post a link to that down below in the description. Anything you make with the pencil brush, I'd love to see. So if you tag me, I'm on Instagram at BrushUpMatt. Tag me in anything you make, and I'll share it with everyone else that's creating stuff with my brushes as well. Or just give me a follow generally. I share upcoming brush packs, examples of how to use the brushes, as well as other people's work that they've made with the brushes, which is awesome to see. Please, if you did enjoy this tutorial and you found it in any way useful, give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'm going to be making a load more tutorials like this about creating Procreate brushes and about Procreate in general. So if you enjoyed the content, let us know by subscribing. Comment down below anything you'd like to see, any tutorials you'd like to see. It'd be greatly appreciated to give us some ideas of what you guys would want to see. Cheers guys, until next time.